was officially my first down the middle that I walked into. I stumbled into because I got stuck in traffic in New York City coming back from a TV studio. All I can say is you're in for a treat. You're going to get to watch me walk into my own set with Peter Boockvar, with Barry Ritholtz, two legends, two brothers of mine. If I was Jewish, they would be my brothers. But what I want for you to do is watch this one to the very, very end. We get a great repartee between me and Peter and Barry, and they're like obviously the brothers from different mothers. But watch this one to the end because the guidance, the life guidance that Barry Ritholtz provides in the very end is so worth your time. Down the middle, hi, how are you? This is Barry, this is Peter. They're like my brothers, trust me.
Can I tell you how?
Google them.
Can I tell you how wrong I was about doing this here? This is very civilized.
This is great.
I just pictured the last few times we were here, it was
anarchy.
a brouhaha. It was madness.
No,
and
when I was
she's
interviewing
crazy.
Arthur, there were 3 women in from Brooklyn getting just middle of the afternoon drunk off their keisters.
Right.
And then whoever was ringing the bell at the New York Stock Exchange is behind us, and you hear champagne bottles pop, 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 pop.
Day drinking with Danielle.
Arthur was like zone. He was zen. He just talked his way right through it, and I'm like, and he refused to film anywhere else but his chair.
He's
Is
a
he
pro.
making it here?
No.
Okay.
He's not coming in
Because
today.
I have some savings of his in my bank
Oh,
account.
I bet.
Yeah, so I was
He always
giving
walks
it
out
to him
and
today.
throws $100 bills, leaves, and says,
Yeah. 'Cause I was
somebody give
gonna
me
give
the, somebody give me the change another day.
Yeah.
I've been begging him to write a book of his recollections, and he keeps threatening to.
Get in line.
I remember your
When
attempt
we-
a couple years ago.
Yeah, I actually attempted to do it. I offered to do it.
I brought him on stage and interviewed him at a conference and had it transcribed and put it on the blog. And I'm like, Arthur, look how awesome this is. You just need someone to talk to,
That's it.
and they'll record it. You don't have
Exactly.
to sit in front of a screen.
No.
Yeah, that's
You don't have to
exactly what
type.
Danielle was like. You just talk, and I will write everything down
Yeah.
for you.
Just tell me the
His
stories.
stories are the greatest.
Oh my God, the stock market crash, the day Kennedy was assassinated, the Tiffany story.
I love the Tiffany story. I love the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh gosh.
And
Fabulous.
one of he tells the story that one of the posts, I don't remember if it was Grumman or McDonnell Douglas or Boeing, but it was one of the big defense guy. They speak to the company all the time. Hey, I'm hearing from my guys that Russian missiles are on the way, and Art runs around and says, I gotta get a short off. The missiles are coming. Goes to his boss and says, I heard a rumor the missiles were coming. I tried to get a short off. I couldn't find any takers. And the boss says, buy me a drink and I'll tell you why you were wrong.
Yeah.
And he buys him a drink and he says, when you
haven't
hear,
heard this one.
No, I
when
know
you
this one,
hear
yeah.
the
I
missiles
know
are
this.
coming, you don't want to get short. You want to get long. Long in a nuclear conflagration, he goes, there's one or two options. Either the rumor isn't true, in which case the market's going to bounce the next day, or it's nuclear war, and then who's going to settle your trade? Art Cashin,
great.
he's the best.
Tylenol. Oh my gosh. I mean, they go on and on and on. Remember when Tylenol got
Yeah.
poisoned,
Right,
whatever?
yeah.
He's got a story for that
Tylenol is the
too.
reason why we have tamper-proof tops.
Yeah.
And they are like a Harvard Business Study explanation of here's how you respond to a crisis. You come out, you apologize, you explain what happened, you explain what you're going to do next, and then you do what you say. And you're completely transparent, and that becomes the model.
Can we export that Harvard case study to the Eccles building, to the Federal Reserve?
Sure, let's talk about the Fed.
I mean, but just apply your rationale to the MIT Mafia at the Fed.
The MIT Mafia. So I think you guys harbor a different perspective as to what's going on, and I'd like to hear
No.
your views.
Wait, let's lay out.
Well, A. Peter's leaving earlier than you are, so.
Okay.
but
So
I'm,
lay out yours.
yeah, I'm dying to hear this.
Okay, so the mistake the Fed has made was that they stayed on an emergency footing too long and should have moved off. The problem with that, and now we have overwhelming evidence that what I'm about to say is true, is that following the 08-09 great financial crisis, there was a dearth of fiscal stimulus, which meant the Fed was operating with one hand behind the back. Yeah, there's $787 billion
It was
of
nothing.
temporary extension of tax cuts, unemployment insurance.
It was
like 200 and something
It was
billion.
6%.
It was nothing.
We pumped 43.2% of U.S. GDP into the veins of consumers in 12 months.
Right. In
It was-
fact,
the New Deal was 40.1%, for God's sake.
I showed a chart a week or two ago that showed in April 2020, unemployment insurance payouts were $1.4 trillion. Trillion.
You're giving somebody $2,500 extra a week to not work on top of their unemployment benefits.
A month, extra a month.
A month.
But that was a 4,900%
We could be like,
increase.
we could be the next communist regime. It had been a week.
4,900% increase. It has since fallen 98% to $27 billion. So the Fed should have gotten off emergency footing. They were fearful that, remember, from let's call it 09, 2010 to 2014, 2015, subpar GDP, subpar job creation, no wage gains, subpar retail sales. And so the Fed was afraid that if they normalized, they would have a low-grade recession that was going to be persistent, and they'd be cutting rates again. Because Congress failed to do their job and substitute federal government spending for household and business. So now fast forward a decade, and we have the pandemic, where you have massive monetary stimulus and even bigger fiscal stimulus. Yep. And so the Fed, I believe the Fed wants to A, normalize rates, get off this emergency footing. B, they're aware of inflation, but they're also aware that the vast majority of inflation, and this is where I think we might disagree.
Oh boy.
The vast majority of inflation is not going to be especially sensitive to rate increases. And therefore, by the time we get to a year from now, inflation not only is falling, but the economy is slowing, and they're going to be back on a potentially stable, maybe outside chance of cutting in 2023.
So, okay.
We're in a very different place, but forget the forecast. The environment is Fed increases aren't going to get chips here any faster. It's not going to get any more houses built to reduce that. It's not going to do anything about the war, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. The big drivers of inflation are not caused by low rates. At least that's how I see it.
Well, but they own a third of the damn mortgage market. Give me a break.
So?
Credit easing was never in their mandate. Credit easing was actually, it's specified in the 1913 Federal Reserve Act that the Fed is not allowed to be entangled in any way, shape, or form with a government-sponsored enterprise. It says it in the language. And Waller didn't dissent. I'm going to, Waller, if you can hear me, why didn't you dissent?
Didn't Bullard dissent?
Bullard dissented, but remember, Waller used to call Bullard
So one last thing, and then I'm going to shut up and let you guys talk. So if the Fed really thought...
He said for the first time ever.
I always say it, I just never do it. If the Fed really thought that they were capable of halting inflation, you had a meeting a month ago, they did nothing done, zero. You had intermarket 6 weeks, nothing done. They could have done 50 bips. The Fed's action, I did not hear Jerome Powell's presser today. So all I'm doing is looking at their behavior, and their behavior says, yeah, inflation is not a big deal. Most of it's behind us. Inflation will be much lower a year from now.
That's what he said.
So, did he say that really?
Well, that's what
Well, that's what their behavior certainly looks like, right?
Well, they're presenting a hopes and wishes strategy. They're hoping inflation goes down because their credibility has been shot. I do want to say 08, 09, after the financial crisis, is that at least I believe that capitalism has an amazing regenerative ability to rise from the ashes.
Resiliency.
Yes. And it doesn't need all this outside fiscal and monetary stimulus. So when you said, well, we didn't get the fiscal stimulus outside of the, that $1 trillion spending, and it was all on the Fed, well, it didn't have to all be on the Fed. The American economy could have regenerated itself on its own. It can function on its own. And the question is, does QE result in faster economic growth? Well, there's no empirical study that there is.
Right.
It influences
It can drag out expansions to where you have the zombies alive for longer.
It can do that. It influences the capital markets more than the actual economy.
Sure.
So the key word there is zombie, and where you and I know are in agreement is maybe you don't need fiscal or monetary if we're not too far from this really handsome building with columns called the bankruptcy court. And if we would have let various banks and brokers and others do a pre-packaged bankruptcy where maybe the U.S. government is the only one who could has enough money to be debtor in possession to finance it and then spin them all out, then maybe you don't need as much monetary accommodation, as much fiscal accommodation, and you have you shake up the Etch-a-Sketch. I know half your audience won't know what that means, but
True.
you do a restart and off you go to the races. Barring that, and what a surprise, when you have an industrialist as Treasury Secretary, the bankers tend to get punished. When you have a banker as Treasury Secretary, guess who wins, guess who loses.
Yep.
So there was also, Bernanke claimed that he was a student of the Depression, he was a student of Japan, and their monetary experience, right. But he repeated the same mistake as the Bank of Japan. The whole point of stimulating, whether it's monetary,
repeat the same mistake?
I'll explain how. The whole point of stimulation of fiscal and monetary is to try to bring forward economic activity and say, you know what, Barry, I'll make a deal with you. I'm going to lower interest rates today, so you can buy that house today because you'll have a lower monthly payment instead of you spending 12 months saving up for a down payment and having to pay a little more. So I'm pulling forward.
Okay.
So there gets a point where if interest rates are just low for a while, there's a law of diminishing returns.
Right.
You disincentivize, you don't create
There's
a sense
no
of
urgency,
anymore.
right.
So that's Japan, having rates low forever. And that was the flaw of forward guidance. The Fed was saying, they thought stimulation was, I'm going to tell the world we're going to keep rates low for a long time. Ended up being at 0 for 7 years. Well, you discourage activity because rates are going to be low. I can wait.
Yep.
I don't need to do anything. And that creates sort of I'm trying to think of the right word, but it just creates
disincentive.
Disincentive, but also a rot within the economy when rates are just low forever. I mean, it just shouldn't be that way. There should be more volatility in where rates go, depending on where the supply and demand for money is.
There should be more volatility in the U.S. economy as a whole. I mean, it used to be. I mean, that's creative destruction.
So here's the caveats to that, and you and my position are not all that far apart. The two caveats are really wrinkles on this. The first is Japan, and most people are unaware. The Japanese bubble leading up to 1980 time, 5x the NASDAQ bubble in 2000.
The S&P was 99 times compared to 40 at the peak.
And they also had a real estate bubble too. They had 2000 and 2008 at the same time.
Yep, they did.
Right, and their structure is such that the Keiretsu in Japan, you have my favorite example. You have Bank of Mitsubishi, you have Mitsubishi Real Estate Holdings, you have Mitsubishi Heavy Industry, you have Mitsubishi Automotive, and so if the bank at the bottom dies, you lose everything. The whole thing collapses. So they were unable to do that. The second issue, and I think this is really important, is the 08-09 crisis was caused by many factors, one of which was the abandonment of traditional underwriting standards by non-bank lenders, and eventually by 06, Fannie and Freddie were petitioning their regulator to let them, but by 06 was all over but the crying. Hold that aside. When we went through a series of changes and you had 0% interest rates and lots of people in homes that were financed for more than were worth, and people who haven't seen wage increases or lost jobs, many of these people were unable to take advantage of these low rates. And that's the bottom third, half, 60% of the country. So the sort of disincentive, the lack of urgency was in the top quarter of the top 30, 40% of the home buyers. And they didn't care because all of their other assets, real estate, stocks, bonds, were all appreciating so well. Who cared what the cost of money was?
I do want to add one more point, and then I
Please, no.
So when you think about,
you're the guest.
Also, when you lower interest rates, what the experience of the last 10 plus years is that the biggest beneficiaries of the lower interest rates has been the capital markets. It's been those that have been able to tap it.
Real assets, capital markets,
well, I'm talking
top
about
decile.
So if I'm trying to stimulate the economy, I want banks to utilize and banks to utilize their lending ability, companies to take advantage of cheap money to borrow. But the problem is
borrow and build.
Right. The problem is that when you lower interest rates across the yield curve, you depress loan margins. Okay, so if I'm a local regional bank that is supplying the blood to small and medium-sized businesses, I have less margin. I can't make as many mistakes because I have less loan margin because of what the Fed has done. You look at the Japanese regional banking system has been destroyed over the last 30 years because of the lack of lending margin. So if you go to a bank right now And I know from experience, it's very difficult to get a loan, personal guarantee, years of experience in a particular field. Where if you went to Wall Street 6 months ago before the markets sold off, it was extraordinarily easy. So small and medium-sized businesses get hurt by the lack of basic lending that banks are supposed to be in business of doing, not expanding their portfolio of U.S. Treasuries, which is much bigger than C&I loans.
And by the way,
I got 2 words for you. Private equity. The expansion of private equity to a multi-trillion-dollar business stepped into that void because the marketplace will not be denied. And if there's a demand for a product, if the banking system doesn't want to provide it, well, then Blackstone and Carlyle and work your way down the road.
So
how much smaller? You're talking about mom and pop?
So a friend and a business that I've invested in, they opened up a franchise, children's swim school, pre-COVID.
Oh, so we're talking very small business.
Yeah, but I'm talking. Here's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Wells Fargo has a franchise lending division, no problem. You've never done this before in your entire life, but you know what? You're a good credit. Obviously, personal guarantees were involved, but they got the loan.
Right.
Then they wanted to open up a second one after having a very successful first
profitable,
one.
Right.
Yeah, and it was 10 times more difficult to get that loan. You had to have a certain number of customers before before you even open. You had to sign up. The hurdles were so much greater. At the same time, like I said, it was very easy to get a loan in the capital markets, and I think that impacting bank profitability impacts their ability to lend. I mean, look at the European banks. The ECB did it to European banks. 80% of lending in Europe is through their banking system. And what did the ECB do? It crushed their ability to make money. And not only that, they were taxing them for the reserves they held at the ECB.
God bless them.
Because of negative interest rates.
Right. Yeah. So I think big companies,
they're going to go into 2 recessions without ever raising rates above
very
negative.
Small and medium-sized businesses, they get hurt because their local banker is just not as friendly.
Right about now, someone's supposed to say crypto fixes this.
Oh gosh, no.
So I'm not disagreeing with you. My personal experience, I remember refinancing a house in 2005, and literally the guy pulled up in the driveway, flung the door open, left the car running, ran in, signed, initial, here's your check, and left. And that was, maybe it was 2004. I remember looking at my wife saying, this has to end badly. He's like, I apologize, I have a closing down the street. In 2013, when we bought the house
drive-by refinancings.
For me, making a nice living with a wife who's been in the same job for 20 plus years and a good credit score, the hoops we had to jump through to get a mortgage. And admittedly, it was slightly jumbo. It wasn't a super jumbo, it was slightly jumbo. But still, it was months and months and months longer. And I'm thinking, I have access to capital, I have money in my bank account. What happens if someone just wants to do a refi of a $500,000 house? They're fucked. They're never going to be able to get this done. Yeah. And that's been part of the entire 2010 to 2020 period. It's not any one president. It's not any one administration. It's not any one Fed. I argue that when households and businesses decrease their spending substantially, I don't mean 10, 20%. I mean when it drops 30, 40, 50%, as Lord Keynes taught us, the government should temporarily step in and make up for that demand. Temporarily. But that demand was never, there's 2 things. There's capital to buy things, and then there's the cost of that capital. The Fed is in charge of the cost of that capital.
Yep.
What we learned with the CARES Act in 2020 and the second CARES Act in 2020 and the third one in 2021 is if you put money into people's pockets, they'll go out and spend it.
All of it.
And that's right. And the amazing thing is if you look at the net savings rate,
it's still another form of cash for clunkers, though. It creates a temporary stimulus to the economy that then fades away.
Yeah, but this one created inflation into a war.
Well, yeah, it created this because the demand was stayed for longer. Our cash for clunkers is over a short period of time.
I was in Europe. Europeans were. This is in October. They're like, "What were you thinking, America? You've given us inflation. You stimulated your economy so much. You stimulated the whole global economy. You give us inflation."
Keep in mind the 2 things about inflation that I think people sort of forget. the U.S. is a predominantly service-based economy versus good-based.
Yeah.
It's like 61-39, something
Yeah.
like that. Until the lockdown, when you weren't going on vacation, you weren't going out to dinner, you weren't going to the gym. Think of all the services that you stopped doing.
Yep.
So you started buying stuff for the house. You bought an outdoor furniture set and a fire pit and a big TV.
Of course you did.
You're buying all this food and all this stuff. So I think it was Rebecca Patterson of Bridgewater said, the amazing thing is that global GDP increased 5% during the pandemic. The problem is that demand for goods increased 20%. And so a lot of this was just people are locked in the house, you're giving them money.
To enable that, though, because a lot of these are big ticket items where people had to borrow money to build a deck, and they had to borrow money to buy a car via the zero rates that the Fed created.
Yeah.
So the Fed was a demand driver here in a lot of these things. When you think about what's the average price of a car?
But you didn't have
than
that
me?
same
45 grand?
44,000?
And the median income is what, 50?
Oh, it's insane.
But the Fed's been at zero for 7 years, and you didn't have a giant spike up in homes. You didn't have a giant
You
spike
weren't
up
going
in
to,
car
but you,
prices.
but you
the
gave,
combination.
but exactly.
That-
You cannot
right.
look at it in a
Right.
vacuum. It was the
So-
Fed underwriting effectively all this stimulus.
So had there been a fiscal
They're like the drug dealer.
stimulus, had there been
Yeah.
a fiscal stimulus of appropriate size, half of what we did in 2020 back in 08, 09, you would have had a better, and of course the bankruptcies, but I think there was no appetite for that. But there would have been a healthier recovery. You would have had far fewer lagging wages the way we did.
Yeah.
And this is true both in the US and globally. When you look at the entire world's inflation, this is why I'm always reluctant to pin everything on the Federal Reserve, because the whole world was locked down and then the whole world had some form of stimulus and people spent that money. And guess what?
Yeah.
Spending a ton of money is going to be inflationary.
Right, but it was quantifiable to how much money we should have given out. We just should have said, okay, this is how much lost income people are
Right, yeah,
experiencing.
right.
Let's just refill the lost income. What we did is we did that and then a lot on top of that. And it was
That's right.
that all that gravy and cherry on top
Yeah.
that created the inflation as opposed to just making people whole again.
Right.
I mean, you've lost 3 million workers between the ages of 25 and 45. 3 million have dropped out of the workforce. That's a big number. It's the
Ask
same
yourself why.
because they had enough to live on.
And still, where are they now? How do they, $2,500 a month for a year
We're seeing labor
doesn't
force
buy you
participation.
3 years of
We're seeing labor force participation come way up, and you saw it. The minute that last child tax credit was delivered in cash, your labor force participation went whoop.
So on the terms of the labor force, I'm going to bring up, I don't disagree with that, but you have 4 other factors that are giant. First, decrease in immigration. Had immigration not
course.
started to fall,
True.
not only but during the previous administration, but this administration
Yep.
as well. It clearly started under Trump, but this administration has done nothing to reverse it.
Yep.
That's 2 million missing jobs.
Yep.
People over 60, massive early retirements. Healthcare and childcare. You have people who basically were forced to stay home and take care, and it's mostly women, by the way.
I'm aware.
And then the fourth thing, and I find this kind of fascinating, is, and I've been talking about this for a while, and I always love it, on those rare occasions where you're ahead of everybody else picking this up. Elvis left the building a long time ago. When you have people locked at home for a year and you give them enough money to live on, a lot of them are going to upskill, they're going to get degrees, they're going to get new vocations, they're going to launch new businesses, apps, consulting, whatever. So I don't think the BLS is picking up a lot of these.
That's the silver lining.
And there was just a Wall Street Journal piece
That's
on
why the
that
unemployment rate's fallen a lot.
Yeah.
Because that's capturing that.
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
survey.
Yeah. So
much for me shutting up.
Yeah, that worked. What should Jay Powell do?
He has to accept and tolerate a period of time when we have slower growth that's notable, because monetary policy is only affecting the demand side. But you need to moderate the demand side. There are less cars to buy. You need to convince people not to buy cars through higher
Price
cost
increases.
of borrowing.
Yeah.
No, through price increases.
Cox
Well, we're
Automotive
already
is saying
seeing
that people are
that. We're
pushing
already
back
seeing
because
that.
of the price.
Right, we're already seeing that. It's because that's the fallacy of running things hot, because then you flame out. And that's the same thing with housing. You need to subdue the demand side to lower the rate of these home price increases to allow people to afford. I mean, when you see home price increases that are so fast that it offsets the benefit of lower mortgage rates, that's a real problem.
So lowest supply of inventory ever.
Not on the new home side.
Well,
we're back to 6 months.
So let's talk about new homes.
Wait. Peter's got to leave in a few minutes. So
that's
right.
I
still don't know
to
what
answer your question, what he should do.
But what should he do? Because Senator Shelby asked him, "Are you willing to be Paul Boocker?" And he said, "I hope history remembers me that way." Yes.
He's not, and
give me a break.
Okay, so this is where we're likely headed because he's acknowledged I'm gonna be double tightening again. He even said that May QT can start.
He came up with a whole new phrase for watching paint dry, and I'm like,
so QT we know impacts markets and PE ratios, call it,
meaning reducing their balance sheet.
Yes.
Right, and rate hikes will impact the demand side of the economy. So he's going to be tightening financial conditions at the same time he's going to be slowing the economy. Magically in his projections, they're going to take the Fed funds rate from 0 to almost 3, and the unemployment rate will stay at 3.5%.
Yeah. How'd that work out the first time you tried it?
That's magic dust. But
bless him.
He needs to start. He should have raised 50 today, because 50 is nothing. when inflation's at 8, raising 50,
there's 703 basis points. The Fed funds rate is 703 basis points
and
behind the curve.
The market has given him some rope. The market has said, Jay, we're giving you 7 hikes. So just get
By the way, what has the market been forecasting about Fed rate increases for the past decade? They've been far more hawkish than the Fed has
absolutely.
Been. Right. So when the market says we predict 7 hikes, it's like you've been talking
it's
about...
what they predict today. There's a demand side viewpoint for a lot of people with respect to monetary policy.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these PhDs, they look at the economy from a demand side lens and not look at the supply side and the demand side lens. So they are overly reliant, and getting back to my point about the ability of the American economy and just capitalism generally to regenerate, is they are overconfident in their abilities. They think low rates good, high rates bad. Well, if low rates are good, even lower rates are even better. And if we get to 0, if you're in Europe, let's go to negative because that has to be the best. And they're too confident in their abilities to influence the economy. And then they overstay their welcome, and then the law of diminishing returns and all the distortions and so on. And then when it's time to pull out, they're in so deep, it creates disturbances when they try to leave.
They're trapped.
Why do you guys think the United States is the only major economy that didn't have negative interest rates?
Because it would have blown up the U.S. money market industry, which is $4 to $5 trillion, and you would have blown up that. Then in turn, you would have blown up the commercial paper market. You would have done such damage.
Plus, other countries had to
workings.
substitute in the Treasury rate because if you pop that negative up into
doesn't
the
work.
Black-Scholes model, it's like not defined.
So that the reason I asked that is if you really believe that the Fed thinks low rates good, lower rates better, why wouldn't they have gone negative?
Because of what I just said.
So you think a few $1 trillion stands between them and even better rates?
But the whole plumbing of the U.S. financial system would
it's a different system.
I'm aware of it.
And look what's happened to Europe. I mean, the equity value of European banks, they're down 75% from its peak in 2007.
Right.
How are you going to create a healthy foundation for growth when you do that to your banking system?
So the point I'm raising is if there's a line that the Fed won't cross because they know the ramifications of that line,
breaking credit.
What we're really talking about is where does the Fed believe that line is?
So Danielle,
you're saying they think it's at 0.
I think it shouldn't be. Danielle, for years, and I give her a lot of credit for saying this, post-financial crisis, when the Fed started lifting interest rates, said that they should never go below 1%.
That's interesting.
The floor should be higher.
Why?
The floor should be higher because it encourages banks to lend. You got to have some curve in the yield. And if you go down to 0, all kinds of shit starts to break.
We've seen
you
seen
encourage really, I mean, like, it used to be called Harrah's, now it's called Caesars.
I mean,
you've got companies that are around that should have long since gone away.
And it also should relate to, lending below a rate of inflation. You're almost guaranteeing that on a real basis, I'm going to lose money on a loan.
Yeah.
And how does that translate?
That's why apartment buildings are trading hands at 2% cap rates. I'm like, you got to be kidding me.
There's been a bunch of other laws that affected that.
Barry,
Good to see you again, man.
Okay, so your Twitter feed, my Twitter feed, when Canada seized, appropriated funds from the truckers, you saw the rage on Twitter.
No, I didn't. I first of all, I didn't know what the truckers were protesting.
I didn't understand that either.
We talked about rule of law before.
Yeah.
If you're going to bring your tractor trailer in front of my house, then I'm going to tow that thing away and slap you upside your head when you do it. And the question is, why did it take them 21 days?
That I don't get.
They should have done that much sooner.
No.
And the convoy, it's kind of they're coming to D.C.
Yeah.
Right.
How'd
It's
that
like,
work out?
do you really want to
But
spend
I'm
all this?
talking about Trudeau seizing people's bank accounts.
I was not tracking that. I was
Okay,
not paying
well,
attention
so
to
that was kind of, so there was a lot of awareness. And then,
Is this a true thing or is this a Twitter thing?
no, it's a true thing.
So do they have a law and a process by which they can do it, or is it preemptive, like the U.S. allowing police departments to seize cash if they allege it's the result of a crime, even though they have no proof? And it's even gotten as bad as people going to buy cars. Army guys in uniform have had cash taken from them. The U.S. forfeiture rules, it's one thing when you're convicted of a crime. It's another thing when they say, we're going to assume a pile of cash is criminal. U.S. does that.
Well, what I'm getting at is there was a lot of outrage.
Yeah.
You can't do that. You can't go and take away my money, blah, blah, blah.
What's the law say? What's the rule of law as it's applied? Did the
Well,
government act appropriately or did they violate the law?
I think Trudeau bent the law is the situation. So what I'm getting to is very few people in our little universe were kind of, the hair stood up on the back of their neck when we seized Russian central bank reserves.
Yeah, nobody cared about that. I didn't see anybody object to that.
Well, I was.
Really?
Well,
you want to say that publicly? Hold on. Stop rolling.
No.
You sure you want to say that?
No, the sanctions are one thing, but if you're Saudi Arabia, you're like, can the United States come in because they don't like my politics and seize my oil?
No, but if you invade another sovereign nation, they can, and we have to be careful not to blur the lines between the U.S. has mustered world opinion because somebody did something we didn't like versus they're committing war crimes, shelling citizens.
No. I'm not disagreeing with you about anything that's going wrong in Ukraine.
Right.
Nothing.
But I mean, you have to be careful not to conflate two different things.
But this is the first time that you've ever really seen a strategic default on treasuries.
By
the United States of America.
How did the United States strategically default on treasuries?
Because they froze $100 billion.
That's not a default.
You can interpret it as being a default. But my question is...
Only if you want to be wrong.
Could we do the same thing to China?
I think they're too big of an economy. I don't know if we could. The interesting fallout from this, and here's where you and I are looking at the same thing. Saudi Arabia saying, hey, maybe we'll sell oil to the Chinese.
They've been saying that for 10 years.
They've been saying it longer than that.
The world ended in 2017 because the same exact thing was going to happen.
Right.
But it's a whole different dynamic. China's got more leverage than they had before.
That's good. Yeah.
China has more leverage than they had before in terms of bargaining with the United States.
Yeah.
Because we took this extraordinary step. We crossed a Rubicon. And they've got
didn't we do this
trillion.
to Iran 40 years ago?
Sanctions. This is different.
Iran is not part of the rest of the global financial system. Is Iran part of SWIFT?
No, but they cut Iran off SWIFT.
Yeah.
They did. They didn't cut Russia off and say, okay, Gazprom's bank can not be cut off the system.
No, this was a giant fuck you. Let's not mince words. This was like, but the difference between Trudeau disciplining a bunch of unruly truckers and what took place with Russia is, to his credit, Biden has put together the most cohesive coalition maybe since Bush, and even then the allies went in kind of kicking and screaming because they weren't fully convinced. This is pretty clear. Hey, this is on your eastern doorstep. Russian aggression is real, and here's the videotape.
Oh yeah, no doubt. But I'm trying to.
So it's not a unilateral U.S. thing. It is a
no. They had $200 billion in euros in reserves. Those were seized too.
So when a rogue actor gets the whole world mad at him, other than China, North Korea, and Iran.
And
right?
Saudi.
And Venezuela, I guess. You might as well throw them into the mix.
Well, no, we sent a delegation down there.
Why did God decide to put oil in the worst places in the world?
France, Paris is sitting on one of the biggest fracking shale formations on the planet.
Under Paris.
Yes.
Yeah, no one's putting up drills in
France is like no.
In Paris.
All six Paris.
Although you could go
all
sideways.
All six French banks signed a petition that they would never lend.
But you could go like 30 miles outside of Paris and go in sideways. But when you look at what Putin did, right, and when you look at the global response, I'm always careful of avoiding the slippery slope and extrapolating too much and saying, Putin did this, and here's the U.S. response. None of our bank accounts are safe. The U.S. can take your money. I'm
not drawing that distinction. I'm saying, if you're Xi Jinping, what are you making of this in terms of your calculus if you read Putin's speeches and if you read Xi Jinping's speeches, they talk about, the disgrace. They've been disgraced on the Western stage. Mm-hmm. They've had their territory taken from them, and it's rightfully theirs. You could actually switch their speeches out for one another, and they sound really similar.
Well, Taiwan and China, obviously.
That's what I'm talking about.
But I think the takeaway. So I was not privy to any of the conversations between Biden and any of the rest of the world. But I have to suspect that the subtext is whatever we are saying to Putin in his aggression, you understand that Taiwan, our ally, and China are going to be watching what we say very carefully. And if I'm Xi, I'm looking at this and saying, well, we're the second largest economy in the world, and we're one of the fastest growing large economies. And if we ever invaded Taiwan, I don't think they could do this to us. But I'm gonna, from a game theory, argue that the window for China's acquisition of Taiwan,
Xi Jinping would say reacquisition,
repatriation. Supposedly they are very touchy about how anybody says anything about Taiwan.
Oh yeah, you got to say
so
it right.
I guess Ritholtz Wealth Management isn't going to open a Beijing branch anytime, but Taiwan has been an independent country for a century plus.
Yeah.
If they blame the British for separating it and Hong Kong and everything else, the Brits also cut up the Middle East in a way that has been problematic ever since. I think the window for Taiwan and for one China is closing, and as much as Xi appears to be, look, if Trudeau went rogue, it's our longest border. The U.S. would be a little reluctant to, slap Canada around. So that the relationship between China and Russia, obviously a very long northern border.
Of course.
That said,
and Xi Jinping knows that his military ally is not quite as good as he thought his military ally was.
Potemkin Village much? I mean, they're still a nuclear power. They still have weapons. Let's not do that. But the vaunted Soviet armed forces
they took out their own communication system.
How
do you do that?
So this is it's more than just a military failure. This is a logistical failure, which is how military operates. Which, by the way, the U.S. military, no matter what you think about how much we spend and all the to a man whose only tool is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, and the U.S. has a tendency to get into wars of choice that we really shouldn't. All that said, the U.S. military is really a very, very competent logistical organization.
Badass.
And when you look at the muffed vaccine rollout in the U.S., that wasn't fixed by any one politician. That was fixed by a politician military. By saying, you guys seem to know what the hell you're doing. You do this.
Operation Warp Speed.
Yeah, and people don't realize we're up to 75% of the over 18 population fully vaccinated. That's an amazing number. And the vast majority of that was military logistics. So as much as I don't want to just cast aspersions without pointing out, the U.S. is a substantial logistical player. You would think the Soviet Union has enough practice with this, but that's the difference between the Soviet system, which is thought of as corrupt as it is, by people who are spoon-fed nonsense from I'm still calling them Soviet, not Russia, because modern Russia is very much like the Soviet
It was
Union.
KGB, I mean.
Right, and the fact that state TV is feeding them an endless stream of bullshit. I got into a little argument with someone on Twitter the woman who came on the TV show, the employee, and opened the sign. They're like, it just goes to show you how naive Americans are. That was all set up. That's all. I'm like, I don't think so.
Has anybody seen if she's gone off to the gulag?
No, she went to court. They gave her a fine. They let her out, which this person then says, see, if this was real, they would have thrown her in jail. I'm like, I don't know if I'm not cynical enough, or you're way too cynical. But I mean, they hustled her off the air in 8 seconds. I mean, it wasn't like she was there.
That was like the cane.
Right. So anyway, I don't know if I'm the premier of China and I'm looking at this, not the military power I thought, certainly not the economic power they once were.
Nope.
Not that they ever were, which is hilarious. But then now, hey, you're going to be a trading partner with these guys. You're going to be bartering goods for oil because they don't have a whole lot of capital anywhere. Nope. So from a global perspective.
No, I mean, Russian exports were up 72% in January. 72%, and it all went into the hands of a few men.
Well, but a lot of that was oil.
Just oil windfall.
Prices.
No, this is just oil windfall, but it went straight into the hands of the most corrupt elite people in the country. It didn't go to the people.
So here's the question that some people were asking: who's wealthier, Bill Gates or Vladimir Putin? And by a lot of measures, it was a toss-up. Ask that same question today, and arguably, I don't know if Putin has access to his money because a lot of it is outside of Russia.
It would have to be. I mean, United Arab Emirates is making a play right now.
Yeah.
They're trying to be the next Switzerland.
Interesting.
Well, they were one of the countries that when Janet Yellen proposed a 15% global
tax, minimum corporate tax,
the UAE was like, And now
there's always a free rider. It's
a
problem of antitrust. There's always somebody, when everybody agrees to something, there's an advantage to not being part of that. There's always someone who's going to be a free rider.
And the UAE abstained from voting on the Security Council as well. Because they're like, we'll take the oligarchs' money and you can come domicile in our country as well if you get thrown out of Dublin.
Too hot. It's too hot. Who wants to live there?
You just have to have your company headquartered there. You don't have to live there.
Oh no, the oligarchs, if they ever want to see their money again, they have to
they got to go to UAE.
Right.
Yeah.
None of this is coming by any electron. There is no ACH coming. There's no electronic wire coming. So that's what I mean. It's too hot. You want to see your money, you gotta. The advantage of Switzerland is at least the climate is.
It's lovely.
Right. It's not that terrible. So.
And they like the snow. I don't know how much they like the sand, but that's kind of where we're going with this, and it's pretty. I don't know. Is this a defining moment? Is this different than other geopolitical moments that the markets always inevitably shrug off?
Well, that was the Business Week column I did, but even World War II, it took 180 days for the market to bottom, and a year later it was at all-time highs after Pearl Harbor. That's a crazy thing.
Yep.
So back to the Art Cashin conversation. If this spreads to NATO and becomes a nuclear war, the trades aren't going to settle. It doesn't matter.
No.
But if this stays, and I know this is a dirty word, contained to the Russian-Ukraine region, well, Crimea wasn't a defining war. Moldova wasn't a defining war. Georgia wasn't a defining war. The difference here is that Ukraine borders Poland. Ukraine is right on European border and the Black Sea, and when you look at that area, keep in mind the difference between Ukraine and Georgia and Moldova is Ukraine had nukes when the Soviet Union fell apart, and part of the deal the U.S. brokered of the Ukrainians giving up their nuclear deterrent, because essentially they were a not exactly first world type of ability to protect nuclear weapons so they don't fall into the wrong people's hands. there was an agreement that the West would keep them safe. Arguably, we've abrogated that agreement, and it's, they were never part of NATO, but there was a sort of, hey, you will supply us, which we've done, and you'll give us weapons, and
yep. We forget that in 1972, Richard Nixon, they came out with a Shanghai communique that basically said, one China, you can have Taiwan. We just passed the 50-year anniversary of that. Like the United States, when he came home, it was him and Kissinger in a room.
Right.
And they threw their Secretary of State out of the room.
Right.
So when they got back to the United States, they're like, you just did what?
Right.
You just gave Taiwan back to China?
Well, I think something like that might require Senate ratification. I don't know if Nixon had the authority to do that. Not that China cares. So back to Xi.
Yeah, I mean, this is it. This is our friend Leland Miller. He's like, he's going to do whatever it takes to get through November, to get that third term. And he also said, by the way, at some
third
point...
5-year term. Has it been 10 years already? Is that right?
Yeah.
Wow, that's amazing.
But once he gets this third one, he's in for life.
So here's the question. If you're looking at him, if you're him looking at the world, wouldn't now be the time to take Taiwan? Militarily,
they thought they had Russia with them and the Russian military machine.
China has a decent-sized navy, a giant army.
Their first
ton of
aircraft
money.
carrier was like Legos, and then their second one was like world class.
Well, China is very good at borrowing,
stealing technology,
borrowing designs
You're
from
so much more
U.S.
diplomatic
defense
than I am, Barry.
Things again because we're going to be opening up Ritholtz Wealth Management in Beijing. Although really Singapore is the place to go over there. Expats
are leaving Singapore in droves.
I thought they were leaving Hong Kong for Singapore.
No, it was
really?
Bloomberg headline.
I missed it. Huh. So.
You work at Bloomberg. You're not supposed to miss headlines.
There's 10,000 of them a day.
That's
so
true.
And that's not where I work. That's just my side hustle.
That's your side gig. That's right.
So here's the real question: why doesn't China just buy as much of Taiwan as they can? Like you would think they would be able to, between their state, private, melded enterprise, you would think they would be able to go out and buy up half of Taiwan.
Yeah, but they can't.
Can't bring it home, but...
Right, but you can't go buy Taiwan Semiconductor.
You literally can't. You literally could go buy shares in Taiwan Semiconductor. Although I don't know what Taiwan rules allow.
So you're suggesting China does a leverage buyout of Taiwan Semiconductor?
I think that's
best
for
the value
everybody
of the country.
involved. I think if they not Taiwan Semiconductor, Taiwan.
No, I understand. I'm just saying Taiwan Semiconductor is a big chunk of the GDP.
I'm going to tell you a story I've never told before.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, down the middle exclusive. Listen up.
So the first person I worked for, I'm not going to mention their name. My first job was at a firm that was the predecessor, eventually became E-Trade. And he goes to work for one of the senior guys there. Long story, they spin out a company, it goes public, and now it's across the street from where we're sitting. But anyway, he used to jokingly say, I'm not a billionaire, but I can see it from my backyard. And he had a neighbor who was a pain in the ass. He really didn't like this guy. And one day they get into an argument, and the guy says, if you don't like it so much, why don't you just buy my house? And he says, what do you want? And the guy throws out a number that he thinks is ridiculous. And he pulls out a check, writes it, says, has your lawyer get in touch with my lawyer? Get the fuck out of my house in 30 days. Like literally, that was the story. And now it's just adjacent to his yard. The house is gone.
I was going to say, he just has a big backyard.
Right.
That's very Texas, by the way.
So you're right. It's like...
buy one, get one free when Californians come. They're like, oh my God, the houses are so cheap. I'm going to buy one, get one free.
So the question is, I'm not Leland's the guy to ask this question because I don't know Taiwan law. I don't know China's motivation.
I know, but that's really an interesting way of looking at it.
They have become so wealthy over the past 30 years, primarily by selling everything they can make to the West. If they really want to buy Taiwan, you don't have to invade them. Make them an offer they can't refuse financially. I don't mean a Godfather offer. Just add another zero to that check, and now you're back to one China.
Look, China created a municipal bond market overnight. They're like, oh God, we've got to move some bad debt. What are we going to do? And they're like, I know, we'll create a municipal bond market.
There you go.
And they just move things around. I'm not in the camp that thinks that China's going to blow up tomorrow. But I'm also not in the camp that thinks that China has endless amounts of money.
They seem to have done a really good job. So somewhere between a fully managed economy and a hands-off, we don't need an industrial policy economy, somewhere in the middle is a good balance between free market and, hey, sometimes the free market can't look out, forget past next quarter, 2 decades from now.
Yep.
And so the idea of saying, a public-private partnership, I love when the youngins say to me, of course the private sector is better. Look at the space exploration. I'm like, you're too young to remember that this is built on 75 years of NASA. This didn't come out of left field.
Exactly.
Form. So.
But we forget the New Deal was a predominantly public-private partnership, and it built a bunch of stuff. Built the Lincoln Tunnel. I mean, it built a bunch of stuff. That was public-private.
So that was the piece I did in 2020 for Business Week, which was Go Big. There's a wonderful book called, by Srivasan is his name, called Americana, and it looks at 400 years of American capitalism. And what's so shocking in the book is every major innovation has its roots in a public-private partnership. Railroads, telegram, canals, all these things were initially way too big and expensive.
The Erie Canal has put this little
New York State
island
bonds.
on the market. I mean, on the map. Lacey Hunt tells me the story of the nickel tax. That's how Eisenhower built the interstate highway system. Not a penny of public debt.
Nickel on each gallon of gas.
Yeah.
Back when gas was 20 cents.
I mean, but it built the interstate highway system. Yeah. And productivity went through the roof.
Yeah. You can move goods around the country.
No, I mean, I've advocated for $3-4 trillion of infrastructure spending, real infrastructure spending.
Look, we've the gas tax is unchanged since the early 90s. It's 30 years ago. Everything has gone up more. And even if electric cars eventually become dominant, that's still a decade away at our earliest. There's a ton of cars and trucks out there.
Should we be drilling?
Drilling for what?
More. Should we have pipelines?
My favorite expression about oil came from, I don't remember who it was, but it was a Saudi minister who said, that's a waste of oil, converting it into fuel and burning it. Oil is much more valuable as a material than as an energy source. It's not just plastic. It's a million other polymers and other things. That's the value of oil. But you consume much less of it when you're not lighting it on fire. So I don't know where the price of oil ends up when the world is 50% EV, but it's an interesting question. And look at the underperformance of the, big oil companies, the major oils. It's kind of suggesting, other than the past 6 months.
Right.
But look at the past decade. It's been a long time since ExxonMobil was in the top 10.
And now they're doing gigantic mergers and acquisitions and taking on debt and doing it all over again. Why?
Because they have no choice. Because they need economies of scale, because eventually the massive demand for their product is going to fall. It's not going to go to zero, but it's going to diminish when less and less cars are internal combustion engines.
So, Barry, let's just say, for example, and I know this is like an outside possibility, but let's just say that whoever's watching right now doesn't know who you are, which is impossible.
The youngins don't know who I am. I kind of it's always interesting when I chat with somebody and then like a week later I get an email from them. It's like, I had no idea. I thought I recognized your voice. It's always amusing stuff.
You do have your voice is very recognizable. How do you find your guests? First of all, what is Masters in Business? And well, no, before that.
Where do we want to start? The problem is I'm like an octopus. I got too many things going.
You got your day job.
Right.
What's your day job?
So I'm chairman and chief investment officer of Ritholtz Wealth Management. We're an asset management and financial planning firm. We manage just under $3 billion for about 1,700 families.
Okay, that's cool.
It's fun, yeah. I work with some great people. My founding partners are Josh Brown, Michael Batnick, Chris Venn, all of whom have, since the day I met them, continued to astonish me. They're all upside surprises.
Yep.
You don't normally draw to an inside straight like that where each card is an ace. But lots of people know who Josh Brown is.
Oh, yeah.
People are starting to learn who Michael Batnick is and are starting to learn who Chris Van are, who are both rock stars as well. Josh isn't the only rock star in the firm. So that's the
Last
day
time I
job.
saw Josh was here.
Oh, is that true?
Last time I saw Josh in person was here at this Bobby Vance.
He's here usually once a week across the street.
Yeah.
So that's the day job.
What's Masters in Business, and what inspired you to create it?
So that's a story which I don't recall if I've told publicly, but I've certainly said enough. All right, so the arc of this is I started a blog in the 90s on Yahoo GeoCities where you would have to take...
Google it.
Right? You would have to take... It was HTML. It would take you a half hour to write whatever you wanted and then 2 hours to code it. I got very good at HTML code. In 2003, I moved that to TypePad, which was a WYSIWYG. What you see is what you get. So there was no more HTML coding, although it was very useful having all that HTML because I could go into the code and make things, do things that the WYSIWYG couldn't. And then in 2008, I moved that to WordPress, where it's been ever since. My initial claim to fame, in early 2000s, I was writing for TheStreet.com. I had a series called The Apprenticed Investor that did pretty well. My claim to fame is in, was it 07 or 06? I'm in the Business Week annual. I get an email from somebody, hey, so-and-so dropped out of the Business Week annual forecast. Would you like to jump in? And I'm like, I have a vivid recollection of writing back, and I'll get to Masters in Business. I have a vivid recollection of writing back and saying, listen, nobody can really forecast. Here's my column following a forecast. Why don't we do some counter program explaining none of these people know what they're talking about. Every year it's a different person. It's totally random, blah, blah, blah. And they said, it's a double issue. It sells a lot of advertising. Would you like to be in it? Sure. So I had just done a column for TheStreet.com called The Cult of the Bear, which was December 06. And it said, listen, this rally isn't done. There's a lot more upside. Here's the trend. Here's this, here's that. However, if you read the Reinhardt and Rogoff, just the 5 crisis research paper, not the book that came out post-crisis, hey, this financial crisis, if we get a financial crisis, we should expect real estate prices to fall 30%, stock prices to fall as much as 50%. Let's plug those numbers into the Dow and calculate where the market will be.
Yep.
So the actual number I had come up with at the time the Dow was 13 or 14,000 in that range was 6,800. And the way I calculated 6,800 was doing the math on the crazy way the Dow was calculated. 9,800 was my earnings-based Dow number.
Yep.
But breaking 10 would cause a 3,000 point panic. So I did Dow 6,800. And when I gave that whole thing with all the parallel, the S&P, I got an email back. I'm like, there's a typo in your forecast. It says 6,800. And it's like, that's the Dow forecast. And they're like, okay, so it's 15,000, 16,000, 14,000, and then me at 6,800. Kudlow has me on the show, excoriates me. I was a regular on Kudlow, and he just had a field day. So the funny thing is, we moved to all cash. This is pre-Ritholtz Wealth. We moved to all cash in January of 2008. And by March of 2008, suddenly, most favored nation, I'm on all these channels. And I'm getting called in every other day. Come talk about, this was only like 12,000, 11,000. But people were freaking out. The housing market was a disaster.
Oh, I know.
That led to the Washington Post, which eventually led to Bloomberg. And when Bloomberg, I saw as a Washington Post.
Wait, well, now I'm going to.
It's such a long, terrible, boring story. Yeah.
So I interviewed Randy Forsyth for the show.
Oh, sure. Barron's.
One of the first things I remember after I met you was the first time you were in Alan Abelson's column.
Yeah, that was delightful.
You like picked up the phone and you're like, hey, didn't you call a relative?
What?
No, didn't you call a relative and say, I'm in Barron's, I'm in Abelson's column?
God, God.
Just got to be the first time we were at Camp Kotak. Anyways, it's stuck.
No. I got a phone call from a relative saying.
Okay, I knew a relative was involved.
No, I got a phone call from a relative who said to me, I don't understand, how am I reading Barron's and my cousin is in it? I'm like, your cousin's been on radio and TV before. That's not the first time I've been in the Times or the Journal
Abelson
or
was
whatever.
Something else.
No, he was a one-off. And, he had a bearish bias, and I was the most bearish guy on the street. So it was just, at the time.
Right.
The one thing I'm most pleased about across the entire breadth of my career is I said to a buddy who was a well-known technician, I have vivid recollection of this conversation. As it starts to look like 11,000, 10,000, it looks like, hey, there's a chance, 9,000. A conversation was, please don't let me be that asshole that at 7,000, instead of declaring victory, I double down and say 3,000.
Oh, God, no.
I want you to slap me across the face if I do that. And he goes, you're on. And I was away at 6,800. So when I got back, we were 6,400. It's like, all right, I missed my 68. I gotta honor my thing. And I went on Yahoo Finance, and it turned out to be, by the dumbest of luck, I don't take any credit for the timing of this, the day before the bottom.
Oh, God.
So I'm pleased to be able to be flexible enough to have done both. So how does all that bullshit lead to Masters in Business?
Masters in Business.
So I'm the finance columnist for Washington Post, and I'm at something, at a conference in Vancouver, and I'm flying back to New York, and I have to change planes in Chicago. And I go into the lounge, and I'm waiting for them to call my plane. And on one of the financial channels is Bill Ackman, who is no hedge fund, Pershing Square, notoriously reclusive, does not do a lot of media. He comes out every now and then. So he's not like completely, but he doesn't do a lot. And it was the worst interview I've ever seen of any money manager. So what are your favorite stocks? Where's the Dow going to be in a year? When's the Fed going to cut? Like just stuff that has a shelf life of 30 seconds.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm watching this and I'm doing the slow burn. I'm like furious. And they call my plane and I leave. Just like I watch 15 minutes of it and I walk out. And I get on the plane, and by coincidence, I bump into someone I know sitting a row behind us with adjacent people let us switch. And he's like, why you look so, you're chewing your tongue. And I repeat that story. And he said to me, literally, what would you have asked him? And I just spit out like 10 questions off the top of my head, which eventually became the last 10 questions I ask every guest, which is, who are your mentors? What are you reading? What sort of advice would you give to a recent college grad? What do you know today you wish you knew, 25, 30 years ago when you were started? And when Bloomberg came soliciting for me to write for them instead of the Washington Post, I said, look, I have a platform, you have a platform, why do I have to come here? And they said two things. They said, we're Bloomberg, so here's a giant pile of money. So, okay, you've got my attention. And then the second thing they said is, we have this fantastic platform. Television, would you like a television show? And I'm like, not really. I find financial television to be great background, but not where I want to put my efforts. And they said, what about radio? I'm like, go on. Would you like to do something? And I said, what I would like to do is find intelligent, accomplished, articulate people and have an adult conversation, not 3 or 4 minutes, but long form. And they said, long form, like 15 minutes? I'm like, no, like 2 hours. And they laughed and laughed. And afterwards, they're like, listen, to get an hour of radio, we need about 43 minutes. Traffic, news, sports, commercials. There's an hour. So get us 43 minutes. We'll put everything else up online, and we'll see if this is. I'm like, oh, so like a podcast. And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, let me show you some of these other examples of these long-form interviews.
This is before podcasts were podcasts.
Right.
At the advent.
So arguably, Masters in Business was the first podcast at Bloomberg. In the beginning, it was basically, my first, 20, 30 guests. I just working my way through the Rolodex. You were at the Fed at the time. right? You were not available.
Nope.
But it was the people I personally knew. It was David Kotok and Rosie and go down the, like everybody I knew.
They've all been on down the middle.
Right?
Every last one of them.
It's so that's how I
But that's how you build your network out.
Well, that was the existing network. I think the big name that flipped the switch was Bill Gross. When Bill Gross first came on, so two things happened with Bill Gross. First, when he got shit canned from PIMCO, and everybody was writing all these columns about it, it was like, not for nothing, his performance has been weak the past 5 years. But the guy built $1 trillion business over 40 years. Why is everybody kicking him down? So on the way home, the day he gets fired, I download to the iPad like a dozen his IOs, his monthly investment outlooks, and
which were fun to read. I
read them all on the way home, and it's like a forger. Once you get the guy's stroke down, everything looks like Van Gogh if you can fake that line.
Yeah.
So I sat down and I punched out this like hilarious Bill Gross's last investment outlook. And look, it's not that hard. You start with a pretentious Shakespeare quote.
Yeah.
You include a reference to his cat, and you talk about the Fed and interest rates, and that's your outlook. But I purposefully made it outrageous so that everybody would know it was satire, failing to anticipate the Bloomberg machinery would sand it down. And so we were getting panicked calls from PIMCO. How did you get this last?
Oh.
It read very, very. Mary Childs, whose new book, The Bond King, called me and said, hey, PIMCO's freaking out. How'd you get this? I'm like, Mary, I didn't get it. I wrote it. So there was that. That led to someone at PIMCO sending me the entire bonus structure, which we subsequently wrote. Mary wrote the straight reporting on it. I wrote the opinion piece on it. That led to Bill Gross coming on the show. So once I had Gross on, I've been chasing Cliff Asness, who I find just so adorable and charming and love everything he's built. And just everybody who says no, I'm relentless and I keep going. At the next email from Asness was, I guess if Gross is on, you're going to have to be on. And after Asness and Gross, Dalio had a book coming out in September, and after 100 no's from him, he came on.
Yep.
And so that kind of just opened up the floodgates, and now, I'm up to 400 or so. The first 30 or 40 are not on iTunes, but they're somewhere. Like I have the MP3s of them, but I have to dig them up and post them somewhere because I feel like the entire set is incomplete without the first 6 months, which admittedly, the first year, I was horrible. I watch it now or listen to it now. I am awful. Awful.
Oh, I don't believe that.
Well, as you can see, I like to talk, and you have to get into a modality where, hey, asshole, it's not about you, it's about the guest. Shut the fuck up and ask some questions. I have a guy in the back of my head. That's what I hear.
Oh, yeah.
And you have to learn to listen to that guy. And it took me like 8 months to learn how to do
I
that.
get these YouTube comments. It's like, Danielle, shut up and let the guest talk. And then I had a guest once who had 20-minute answers, and you couldn't get into edgewise.
20-minute answers are better than, yup.
No. Okay, that's toxic. That doesn't work either. I'm just going to ask you the one question because just watchers, viewers, they're younger people. They're getting into investing. What would your advice be to somebody coming out of college? Your one question of your 10, and we'll wrap up with this.
So I'm going to answer it by answering the other question. What do you know now that you wish you knew then?
That
because
works.
That's the advice I would give to my younger self.
Yeah.
Which is, first, it's very hard to think about the long term when you're as caught up in the here and now as we all are when we're younger. So first, compounding is amazing, and if you understand the value of compounding, you'll understand most of the stuff you piss money away on is so ephemeral and so wasteful that you should, I hate when I see advice, you should put 10% of your, like, come on, I barely had 2 nickels to rub together when I was in my 20s, but that doesn't mean I spent money responsibly. and being a little smarter about the apartment I rented, how I spent money, what I spent money on. I should have been saving 40 years ago and was not. And so my retirement accounts and nest eggs, think about it, right? Had I begun investing when I got out of college in the mid 80s, would have done okay. So that's number one. Number two, I'm going to give you three things. So number one, you find a way to just start investing any amount and just be aware.
But saving is the first step.
Well, no, I never wanted to save, but investing, not because you don't want money sitting in a bank account. You want money in a stock market.
I understand, but you've got to set aside some of what you make.
That's right. Number two, and again, this is advice to younger me. Your first job doesn't matter what you do. It's the network you build. It's the relationships you have. It's the skill set that you develop. It's the stack of abilities and knowledge that you're creating. You're creating a skill stack and a knowledge base that you're going to use for the rest of your life. If you focus on that, and it doesn't matter if you're at Goldman Sachs or Bob's house of bonds, it doesn't make a difference. As much as everybody wants the prestigious jobs, it's not the prestige. It's what you build for yourself that you're basically going to live on for the next 40 years.
I say always start in sales, but anyways, that's a form of that.
Some people are really, really bad at it, or really are. It's not their forte, and it becomes like a really unpleasant. Like there are a lot of people who are not that outgoing. A lot of my outgoing bravado is me overcoming for what essentially was a painfully shy childhood. This is all vast overcompensation. So, and I know it may or may not look that way, but I was a quiet kid. I mean, ADHD and all that stuff, but like generally not.
The ADHD, I believe. I'm
not
clinically
all that
hyperactive, which is why I
outgoing.
interrupt all my guests. Anyways.
Right. And then the third thing, and I think this is, I want to phrase this correctly because this could be misinterpreted. We could really just leave it at those two. I'm afraid to say that I want to phrase this. So I'm going to phrase this differently. I'm going to just alter it slightly. Build a portfolio of people, right? Start creating a group of people that you would work for, that you would hire, that you would lend money to, that you would bury a body with. Like and recognizing that sooner rather than later. And I now have a portfolio of people that are all, astounding. I think the path of my career and the sort of the hill I had to climb would have been easier had I started doing that earlier. And sometimes you just, again, it's really easy to get caught up in your head as a 20-something or even 30-something idiot. Being able to get past that, and your life is easier when it's a team effort. That means also, if you're calling on people to help you, you have to be prepared to answer the call.
Sure.
And that happens very much also.
Accountable.
Yes. So having that, all this comes back to, you should be always thinking about building for the future, whether it's building a savings account, building a skill set, or building a team. It's always about, to go from here to there the time is going to go by whether you're doing it or not. So you might as well approach it in a way so that when you get to 20 years, 30 years, 40 years hence, your life is easier, more comfortable, and more satisfying than if you didn't bother with any of those things. Is this too corny, touchy-feely stuff? No. I don't know who your audience is going to watch this deep into the conversation.
Everybody always tells what their secrets are to success.
All right.
Everybody.
Oh,
These aren't
my secrets to success. These are what I wish I did. Would have made my life much easier and success more easy to get.
Then
I was an idiot. I did everything the hard way. Don't do it the way. People say, I want advice as to how you did this. I'm like, why would you want to go up the north face of Killington that's a disaster.
Barry, thank you. It's so much fun to interview somebody who always interviews others.
I just did an interview and I'm constantly editing myself when I'm doing in fact, when I do a long question that's like 30 seconds, I now hear it. I'm like, shut up, that question is too long. No one wants to hear from you. And so I've gotten very good at just nudging people in 5-10 seconds. So coming from that to this, it's just all pent up, blah, blah, blah.
Well, I enjoyed the pent up. Thank you for coming on. I really
pleasure.
appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. I thought we would talk more about the Fed. I was looking forward to arguing with you.
We can argue any day.
We can argue over dinner time.
We can argue over dinner tonight. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Barry Ritholtz, ladies and gentlemen, a man who can talk, but what fun to listen to him, seriously. And we had Peter Boockvar as an appetizer. If you want to hear more of Peter's views, then go back, watch that episode. And if you want the other fun episode that we created here at Bobby Van's downtown across the New York Stock Exchange with Arthur Cashin, Sir Arthur himself, go back and watch that episode as well. And watch this one to the end. I'm hoping you watch this one to the end because Barry's guidance on what he would have done differently is so crucial and it's so well spoken. Very articulate. Thank you. I will see you next time on another edition of Down the Middle with DiMartino Booth.